My mother-in-law looked directly at me, smiled, and said, "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made." The entire restaurant went silent. I could hear the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. And somehow, in that moment, those words sounded louder than everything else. She leaned back in her chair as if she had finally delivered the final blow. Across the table, my ex-husband avoided eye contact. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Neither of them knew what was about to happen. Because exactly 5 minutes later, a stranger would walk into that restaurant carrying a brown envelope. And inside that envelope was something that would change everything. Not just for me. For them too. But what happened before that completely changed my life. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Rachel. At the time this story started, I was 27 years old. I lived in a small town outside Indianapolis, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where grocery store cashiers remembered your name, where rumors traveled faster than the local newspaper. I grew up in a modest family. My dad repaired heating systems. My mom worked part-time at the public library. We weren't wealthy, but we always had enough food, enough laughter, enough love. As a child, I spent most afternoons reading books. On our front porch, I dreamed about having a family of my own someday. Nothing extravagant. I wanted stability, a husband who loved me, children running through the house, Sunday dinners, simple things. By nature, I was quiet, not shy, just thoughtful. I listened more than I spoke. Maybe that's why people often underestimated me, including my future mother-in-law. I met Ethan when I was 23. He had an easy smile, the kind that instantly made people trust him. We met at a friend's birthday party. Within an hour, we were talking like old friends. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. And 2 years later, we got married. Looking back, I can still remember the first time I met his mother, Linda. She greeted me warmly. She hugged me, complimented my dress, asked questions about my family. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But every now and then, I caught something strange in her eyes. A look that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. At first, I ignored it. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Then the little comments started. "Oh, Ethan always dated ambitious women. You seem sweet." Hopefully sweet is enough. She always smiled after saying things like that. So if I reacted, I looked sensitive. If I stayed silent, she got away with it. I chose silence. For years. The first year of marriage was mostly happy. Ethan and I rented a small house with peeling paint and creaky floors. We didn't care. We were building a life together. Or, at least I thought we were. Every Sunday, Linda invited us to dinner. At first, I appreciated it. Then I noticed something. Every conversation somehow turned into criticism. Not direct criticism, subtle criticism, the kind that's harder to defend against. She would compliment Ethan's career, then ask why I hadn't pursued management. She would praise his financial decisions, then ask whether I was contributing enough. Whenever Ethan left the room, her tone changed completely. One evening, she said quietly, "You know, Ethan could have had anyone." I stared at her, unsure whether I heard correctly. She smiled. I mean that as a compliment. I didn't believe her, but I smiled anyway, because I loved Ethan. And I didn't want conflict. The problem was that conflict found me anyway. A year later, Ethan received a promotion. It came with longer hours, more travel, more pressure. At first, I supported him completely. I packed his bags, handled things at home, encouraged him whenever he felt overwhelmed. But the promotion changed something, slowly, almost invisibly. His calls became shorter. His texts became less frequent. When he traveled, sometimes hours passed before he responded. Then entire evenings, then entire days. Every time I mentioned it, he had an explanation. A meeting, a flight delay, poor reception. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Until the night everything changed. It was nearly midnight. Ethan was supposedly attending a conference, 3 states away. I couldn't sleep, so I called him, straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail again, voicemail. An hour later, my phone rang. For a moment, I felt relieved until I answered. A woman spoke. Not Ethan, a woman. And before I could say anything, the call disconnected. I stared at my screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Who was she? And why was she answering my husband's phone? At that moment, I had no idea that one unanswered question was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And what I discovered next would be even worse. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that woman's voice again. It had only been a single word. Hello. But it echoed in my head for hours. The next morning, Ethan called, as if nothing had happened. His voice sounded relaxed, normal, almost cheerful. Sorry, babe. My phone died. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold coffee in front of me. My phone died. Didn't explain why a woman answered, so I asked him directly. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second. But I noticed it. Then he laughed, a little too quickly. A coworker borrowed my phone. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted details, names, explanations. But something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe denial, maybe because I wasn't ready for the answer. When he came home 2 days later, he acted exactly the same. He hugged me, asked about my week, brought me a souvenir mug from the conference. And for a while, I convinced myself everything was fine. But once doubt enters a marriage, it doesn't leave quietly. It sits in the corner and watches. Every late text becomes suspicious. Every unexplained delay becomes a question. Every smile feels different. A few weeks later, I noticed another change. Linda started calling Ethan more than ever, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes 5. If he didn't answer immediately, she'd call again and again. One evening, while Ethan was showering, his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally I never looked, but that night I did. The message was from Linda. It said, "Did you tell her yet?" My stomach tightened. Tell me what? I waited. Maybe another message would appear. A minute later it did. Dragging this out is only making it worse. I felt the blood drain from my face. The bathroom water was still running. Ethan was still showering, and suddenly I realized something terrifying. Linda knew something I didn't. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. When Ethan came downstairs, I said nothing. Not because I wasn't angry, because I wanted answers first. The next few weeks felt like living inside a fog. I watched, listened, waited, and little pieces began falling into place. More business trips, more late nights, more secrecy. Then one Saturday afternoon, I found a receipt. It was tucked inside his jacket pocket. A restaurant receipt, 2 dinners, 2 glasses of wine, a date. On a night he claimed he had been working late. I stood in our bedroom, holding that receipt, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend I never saw it, but another part knew the truth was getting closer. That evening, I placed the receipt on the kitchen table. Ethan walked in, saw it, and immediately froze. Neither of us spoke. Not at first. The silence lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt like 10 years. Finally, I asked one question. Who was she? His face changed, not confusion, not surprise. Guilt, raw guilt. I knew before he answered. I think deep down, I had known for months. He sat down slowly, covered his face with both hands, and whispered something. I'll never forget. I'm sorry. The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. How long? He didn't answer. How long? This time my voice cracked. His eyes filled with tears. Almost a year. A year. An entire year. 365 days, while I cooked dinners, paid bills, planned anniversaries, talked about having children. He was living a second life. I remember backing away from him, not because I was afraid, because suddenly he felt like a stranger. The man standing in front of me looked like Ethan, sounded like Ethan. But he wasn't the man I thought I married. Then came the worst part. The woman wasn't someone he met recently. She was someone Linda had introduced him to. A family friend's daughter. Someone Linda had always preferred. Someone she believed was a better match. The room went silent. I felt physically sick. Every rude comment, every criticism, every passive-aggressive remark. Suddenly it all made sense. Linda hadn't been trying to improve our marriage. She had been waiting for it to fail. And somehow, she had helped make sure it did. The following weeks were a nightmare. Arguments replaced conversations. Tears replaced sleep. Trust disappeared completely. Ethan insisted he was confused. Said he loved both of us. Said he didn't know what he wanted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How do you build a future with someone who can't decide whether they want you in it? Then came the pressure. Not from Ethan, from everyone else. His relatives called. His cousins messaged me. Even distant family members somehow got involved. Their advice was always the same. Marriage is hard. People make mistakes. You should forgive him. Nobody seemed interested in asking how I felt. Nobody seemed interested in understanding what betrayal does to a person. Every conversation felt like a trial, where I was expected to defend my pain. Then Linda called. I still remember standing in my kitchen when her name appeared on my phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Instead, I answered. Her voice sounded calm, almost comforting. Rachel, don't throw everything away over one mistake. One mistake. A year-long affair. Hundreds of lies. Months of deception. And she called it one mistake. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Then she said something that changed everything. Sometimes people marry the wrong person. The words landed like a punch. Because for the first time, she wasn't hiding what she thought. She believed I was the mistake, not the affair, not the lies. Me. I ended the call without responding. That night I sat alone on the back porch. The summer air felt heavy, the sky was dark, and for the first time, I seriously considered leaving. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't see another option. Then something happened that removed all doubt. 3 days later, Ethan didn't come home. No call, no text, nothing. At midnight, I finally received a message. 7 words. I need some time to think. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no concern. Just 7 words. The next morning, I learned exactly where he had gone. And when I found out, the last piece of my marriage shattered forever. Because he wasn't alone. And the person who told me wasn't a stranger. It was Linda. And what she said next would completely destroy any chance of reconciliation. When Linda called the next morning, I almost didn't answer. I was exhausted, emotionally numb. The kind of numbness that settles deep inside your chest after you've cried so much there are no tears left. But something told me to pick up. The moment I answered, she got straight to the point. Ethan is with her. No greeting, no apology, nothing. Just those 4 words. For a second, I thought I had misheard, then she continued. At least now he can figure out what he really wants. I stood in my kitchen, staring out the window. The birds were singing. Cars were passing outside. The world looked completely normal. Yet my entire life was collapsing. And somehow, Linda sounded relieved, almost happy. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough. Enough to stop fighting for someone who wasn't fighting for me. Enough to realize I deserved better than being someone's backup plan. I ended the call. Then I sat down at the dining table, where Ethan and I had shared hundreds of meals. I looked around the room, the wedding photo on the wall, the furniture we'd chosen together, the curtains we'd argued about. Every object carried a memory, but suddenly those memories felt heavy, like anchors pulling me underwater. 2 days later, Ethan came home. He looked tired, ashamed, uncertain. I expected excuses. I expected promises. I expected him to beg for another chance. Instead, he sat across from me and said something even worse. I don't know what I want. I remember staring at him waiting, hoping there was more. There wasn't. That was it. After 7 years together, that was all he had. I don't know what I want. In that moment, I finally got my answer. Because if someone truly loves you, they know. Maybe life gets complicated. Maybe circumstances become difficult. But they know. I quietly stood up, walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. The look on Ethan's face told me he finally understood. A week later, I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much. One bedroom, old carpet, tiny kitchen, a parking lot view. But it was mine. The divorce process began shortly afterward, and if I thought things couldn't get worse, I was wrong. The affair had destroyed my marriage. The divorce exposed who people really were. Family members who once praised me suddenly became distant. Mutual friends stopped calling. Some openly sided with Ethan. Others simply disappeared. One woman I'd known for years actually said, "Maybe you were both at fault." I smiled politely, then never spoke to her again. Because some people are so uncomfortable with betrayal that they'll invent reasons to blame the victim. It helps them feel safer, as if bad things only happen to people who somehow deserve them. Months passed. The divorce dragged on. Lawyers exchanged paperwork. Assets were divided. Documents were signed. Every signature felt like closing another chapter of my life. Then came the final hearing. The judge reviewed everything, asked a few questions, approved the agreement. And just like that, my marriage officially ended. No dramatic music, no emotional speech, no grand finale, just a stamp, a signature, and silence. I walked outside alone. The sky was gray. Rain had started falling. I sat inside my car and stared through the windshield. For several minutes, I didn't move. I just sat there. Because I wasn't grieving the man Ethan had become. I was grieving the future. I thought we would have the children we'd talked about, the vacations we'd planned, the old age we'd imagined. Those dreams died that day too. My 30th birthday arrived 3 months later. I spent it alone. I bought a small cupcake from a bakery, placed a candle on top, and sat at my kitchen table. One candle, one chair, one person. I should have felt pathetic. Instead, something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not happy, not healed, just peaceful. Because nobody was lying to me anymore. Nobody was manipulating me. Nobody was making me question reality. The truth hurt, but truth is easier to live with than deception. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would stop waiting for someone else to save my life. I would build it myself. The next morning, I got to work. Literally, I threw myself into my career. I accepted difficult projects, stayed late, learned new skills, took online courses, read books during lunch breaks, studied at night. Every small improvement became a victory. Months turned into years. Slowly, things changed. I earned a promotion, then another, then another. The woman who once cried herself to sleep after a divorce was now leading teams and managing major projects. For the first time, I saw myself differently. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's ex-wife, just myself. And surprisingly, I liked who I was becoming. 3 years after the divorce, an opportunity appeared. A risky one. A consulting business. Several co-workers thought I was crazy. The economy was uncertain. Competition was fierce. Failure was possible, maybe even likely. But after surviving heartbreak, risk didn't scare me anymore. So I took the leap. The first year was brutal. I worked weekends, late nights, early mornings. Sometimes I wondered whether I had made a terrible mistake. Then slowly, clients started arriving. One became three, three became 10, 10 became 20. The business grew. Not overnight, not magically, just steadily. Year after year, then something unexpected happened. Success brought confidence, and confidence changed everything, including my personal life. I met Michael at a charity fundraiser. There was no instant spark, no dramatic movie moment, just a conversation. Then another. Then another. What attracted me wasn't excitement. It was consistency. Michael showed up every single time. If he promised to call, he called. If he promised to help, he helped. If he said he cared, his actions matched his words. After what I'd experienced with Ethan, that felt extraordinary. 2 years later, we got married. The ceremony was small, simple, beautiful. No drama, no tension, just happiness. A year later, our daughter Emma was born. Holding her for the first time changed me forever. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and suddenly every painful chapter of my past seemed to make sense. Because if my first marriage hadn't failed, I never would have met Michael. I never would have built my business. I never would have become the woman I was. For the first time, I felt grateful for roads that once broke my heart. Life finally felt complete. Then, nearly 9 years after my divorce, something happened. I was leaving my office one evening when my assistant appeared at my door. "You have a visitor." I looked up. "I don't have any appointments," she hesitated. The expression on her face immediately caught my attention. That's why I thought it was strange. My stomach tightened. "Who is it?" She glanced toward the lobby, then back at me. The color drained from my face the moment she answered. Because the person waiting downstairs was someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Someone who should have remained in the past. Someone who suddenly wanted something from me. And when I discovered why they had come, I realized this story was far from over. My assistant looked at me carefully, almost like she was checking whether I was okay. Then she said the name. Linda. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. After nearly 9 years of silence, that was the last person I expected to see. I slowly stood from my desk and walked toward the lobby. Every step felt strangely heavy. Not because I was afraid, because old memories have a way of waking up when you least expect them. When I reached the reception area, I almost didn't recognize her. Linda looked older, much older. The sharp confidence she used to carry was gone. The woman sitting in the chair looked tired. Her shoulders were slumped. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. When she saw me, she stood immediately. "Rachel." I nodded politely. "Linda." An awkward silence followed. For years, I had imagined what I would say if I ever saw her again. Now that moment had arrived, and I had nothing to say. She finally spoke. "Could we talk?" I checked the time. Part of me wanted to refuse. Another part wanted answers. Curiosity won. We walked to a nearby coffee shop. For several minutes, she talked about harmless things. The weather, the town, her health. I listened patiently. Then she finally arrived at the real reason she had come. Ethan needs help. There it was. The truth. I wasn't surprised. People rarely return after 9 years because they suddenly miss you. They return because they need something. I stayed quiet. She continued. Apparently, Ethan's life had not turned out the way everyone expected. The relationship he'd chosen over our marriage had eventually ended. Several business ventures had failed. Debt had accumulated. Opportunities had disappeared. One problem had led to another. Now he was struggling financially. Very struggling. Linda looked down at her coffee. He wants to start over. I folded my hands calmly. And she hesitated, then said the words she'd clearly rehearsed. Your company is successful. There it was, the request. She wanted me to hire Ethan, possibly partner with him, possibly invest in a business proposal, maybe all three. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the irony was overwhelming. The same people who once treated me like a burden now viewed me as a solution. I took a slow breath, then answered politely. No, Linda blinked. Perhaps she expected negotiation. Perhaps she expected guilt. Instead, she received a complete sentence. No. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Or at least I thought it had. 3 days later, she called again. This time she insisted Ethan wanted to apologize. She asked me to meet both of them together. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I owed them anything, because I wanted closure. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, at an upscale restaurant downtown. Michael knew everything. I never hid anything from him. When I told him about the meeting, he simply squeezed my hand. You don't owe them anything, I know. But if you go, go for yourself. That advice stayed with me. Saturday arrived. The restaurant overlooked the river. Large windows. Soft music. White tablecloths. The kind of place people choose when they're trying to impress someone. I arrived first. 5 minutes later, Ethan and Linda walked in together. The moment I saw Ethan, my heart didn't race. There was no anger, no longing, no pain, only distant. He looked older than his age. The confidence I once admired had disappeared. Life had clearly humbled him. We exchanged polite greetings, then sat down. For a while, nobody mentioned the real reason we were there. Small talk filled the silence. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. I made mistakes. I nodded. You did. I hurt you. Yes. He stared down at the table. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then he continued. I was hoping maybe we could work together. There it was. Not reconciliation, not closure, business, money, opportunity. The apology had simply been the doorway. I remained calm. What exactly are you asking? He explained his business idea, a startup. Investors had rejected it. Banks had declined. Financing, he needed capital. And apparently, I was his final option. When he finished speaking, I took a sip of water, then answered, I'm not interested. His shoulders fell. Linda immediately jumped in. You haven't even reviewed the proposal. I don't need to. Rachel, no. My voice remained calm, firm, respectful, final. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, Linda's face changed. The mask she'd worn all afternoon disappeared. Suddenly, I saw the woman I remembered. The one who always believed I wasn't good enough. The one who spent years undermining my marriage. Then she said it, the sentence. The one that would change everything. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. The words landed between us like broken glass. The restaurant seemed quieter somehow. Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. Mom, but she wasn't finished. If he had stayed with you, he never would have discovered who he really was. I stared at her, completely calm. Years earlier, those words would have shattered me. Now they meant nothing, because my value was no longer connected to her opinion. I simply looked at her and smiled politely. And then, 5 minutes later, everything changed. A man in a dark suit entered the restaurant. He scanned the room, spotted me, then walked directly toward our table. My heart skipped once, because I recognized him. He was an attorney, a very specific attorney, and he was carrying a thick brown envelope. Mrs. Turner. I nodded. I have. The final documents. The moment he handed me the envelope, Linda stopped talking. Ethan looked confused. I thanked the attorney. He wished me a good afternoon and left. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. But it completely changed the atmosphere, because neither Linda nor Ethan knew what was inside. Several months earlier, I had received unexpected news. An elderly client named Eleanor Matthews had passed away. Years ago, during the early days of my consulting business, I'd helped her save a family-owned company from bankruptcy. Over time we became friends. She had no children, no close relatives, and before her death, she'd updated her estate plans. The legal process had taken months. The envelope contained the final paperwork. I opened it slowly, reviewed the documents, and felt my breath catch. Even though I knew what was coming, the inheritance was significantly larger than expected. Much larger. Enough to change future generations of my family. Enough that most people would never need to work again. Across the table, Linda's eyes widened. What is it? I closed the folder. It's private. For the first time all afternoon, she had no response. No criticism, no advice, no control, only silence. But the real twist hadn't happened yet. 3 weeks later, Ethan began contacting me. At first, the messages seemed harmless. Then they became frequent, then desperate. Long apologies, long explanations, long discussions about regret. Something felt wrong. The timing was too convenient. The sudden interest, the sudden remorse, the sudden emotional honesty. After nearly a decade, it didn't add up. So instead of responding emotionally, I started reviewing old records, emails, divorce documents, financial disclosures. And that's when I found something strange. Years earlier, during our divorce, Ethan had claimed certain accounts didn't exist, but a forgotten email told a different story. One account led to another, then another. Eventually, my attorney became involved. What we discovered shocked everyone. During the divorce, Ethan had concealed significant assets, investment accounts, transfers, financial holdings, all carefully hidden. The evidence was undeniable. Every document connected perfectly. Every date matched. Every transfer created a trail. When confronted legally, Ethan's response was immediate silence. Then cooperation, because facts don't argue. Facts simply exist. Several months later, a settlement was reached. Not because I wanted revenge, because the truth required accountability. The matter ended quietly. No public humiliation, no courtroom drama, no victory speech, just consequences. And strangely enough, that was enough. I thought I would never hear from Linda again. I was wrong. 6 months later, she requested one final meeting. This time, she came alone. No business proposal, no request, no manipulation. Just a tired woman carrying years of regret. We sat together in a small park near the river. Autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk. For a while neither of us spoke. Then she finally broke the silence. I blamed you. I looked at her. She stared ahead. not at me, at the water. It was easier than blaming him. The honesty surprised me. More than anything else she'd ever said. She took a slow breath. I spent years convincing myself you weren't good enough. I remained quiet. You weren't the problem. Those 4 words carried more weight than she realized. Not because I needed validation. Because they represented truth, and truth had finally caught up with her. After all those years, we talked for nearly an hour. Not about money, not about business, not about the past. Just life. When we finally stood to leave, she hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. You deserved better than what we gave you. I smiled gently. Yes, I did. There was no anger in my voice. No bitterness. Just acceptance. Because by then, my healing no longer depended on apologies. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about divorce. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about self-respect. Sometimes people leave your life and convince themselves you're the reason. Sometimes they rewrite history because facing the truth is too painful. Sometimes they only return when they need something. But you don't have to participate in their version of the story. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need everyone to understand what happened. You simply need to know your own value and protect it. Today, I wake up beside a husband who keeps his promises. I watch my daughter chase dreams without fear. I run a company built through persistence, sacrifice, and faith. And every now and then, I think about that afternoon in the restaurant. The moment Linda said, leaving me was the best decision her son ever made. Because in an unexpected way, she was right. If Ethan had never left, I might never have discovered my own strength. I might never have built the life I have now. I might never have become the person I was meant to be. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the reason your life finally changes for the better. And sometimes walking away is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of the one you were always meant to live. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. I'll see you in the next one.